We've closed on over 300 cash flowing, tax saving Airbnbs over the past 5 years. And if you're a high income earner making over $400,000 per year, you're probably considering real estate for the combination of getting cash flow and massive tax benefits. So, for the first time ever, I'm going to pull back the curtains on everything we do to help clients find and buy cash flowing, tax saving Airbnbs. Make sure they maximize the cash flow by pairing it up with a co-host or somebody who manages the property as turnkey as possible, and then maximizing the tax benefits with a proper CPA who actually specializes in filing short-term rental tax returns every single year. And for you, this is the one video you need, because over the past few years, what we've discovered is helping people get started along this journey, they typically encounter the same roadblocks every single time. Roadblocks like, how do I make sure the property is going to cash flow? How does all the tax stuff work? Where are the best markets? What are the best property types? And then specifically, what type of designs and unique amenities do I need to add into the property to almost guarantee that I'm not only going to cash flow positive, but the property actually pays for itself almost every single month of the year, so that I can repeat this process over and over and over again, so that I can speed into retirement faster, because instead of my peers who are working 12 months of the year and essentially funding the IRS or an inefficient government for 3 to 4 or 5 months out of the year with the income that they pay out, they instead are funding their real estate portfolio, which cash flows, which goes up over time, and they're speeding into retirement faster. So buckle up. This is probably going to be one of my favorite videos I ever put together. If you stick around to the end, you'll also get our list of all our top cash flowing markets for the year, the best property types within them, a breakdown of all the different deal types that we do, and some case studies of some clients who have been exceptionally successful, repeat clients over and over in the same area. So enjoy the video. All right, so short-term rentals. You and I both know you're thinking about it, you've been thinking about it. Where I typically encourage clients to start is just identifying what success looks like. So a few examples that you're gonna see on the screen. Number one is Eno. So when you're getting started in any investment journey, what's really important to start with is, what does success look like? Because one of the easiest things to do is just model what other people have already done that's working. So Eno is a client who came to us a couple of years ago. He was making exceptionally high income. He's actually in the precious metals business. And what he knew is he was going to incur a massive tax bill. So he, just like most of our clients, and you're probably going through this too, kind of had this trigger event that had him recognize, I got to do something about my current situation. So you're probably like Eno, where you're getting into this stage of, I'm making a lot of money, I'm worth a lot of money, and then I also look at what some of my peers in my space are doing as well to sort of shield against the taxes that they're having to incur, and then also just finding a better vehicle to park their wealth and actually grow it faster than the S&P 500, index funds, Roth IRA, 401k, the typical standard conventional approaches that just aren't really going to get you to retirement any faster than anyone else. So Eno got clear on the solution of, I could probably just buy an Airbnb or a few Airbnbs this year. I could use the offset to reduce my total taxable income and save a ton of money on my taxable income, while also making sure I'm cash flow positive, or as cash flow positive as possible along the way. And even more specifically, he started coming up with these internal dialogues around topics like, instead of retiring 12 to 25 years from now, I want to move that to 4 to 8 years from now. And I'm frustrated with taxes. I want the tax benefits now. I want cash flow from my assets and investment portfolio. I want to actually build my wealth faster. And I just want a better alternative to the S&P 500, the Roth IRA, everything else that I'm typically doing year over year. So he got clear on what his ideal self would look like after doing short-term rentals, where he's now getting cash flow from his assets. So instead of just parking funds into his typical retirement portfolio, which wasn't really giving him any immediate cash flow, he's now getting cash flow. He's getting massive tax benefits. He keeps more of his hard-earned income, and now he's able to do things he wasn't able to do in the past. For example, he would work 70-plus hour work weeks. Now that he's able to offset most of his taxable income, he's able to take additional vacations with his spouse and with his kids. He's able to see higher pay stubs or higher direct deposits from his employer, because now, instead of having 20, 30, 40% of all of his income withheld, he's hanging on to more of that and is able to deploy it and invest more into his retirement portfolio, so he can get to retirement faster. So also along the journey for Eno, as well as hundreds of other clients, you also have to get clear on why short-term rentals are going to be a more ideal scenario for both the cash flow and the tax savings. So what I've found is most clients will be considering one of 3 different routes. They'll typically be exploring long-term rentals, they'll explore short-term rentals, and then they'll explore something like multifamily, and I'm just going to quickly break down the pros and cons of each. With long-term rentals, the most ideal scenario is that you're buying real estate and really taking an exceptionally long game with this. It's low degree of difficulty. There's very low maintenance and input required once you actually close on the home. But here's where the problems come in. Right now, with interest rate environments, you are pretty much zeroing out your cash flow when you also factor in things like CapEx, maintenance, and repairs. And probably my least favorite thing about long-term rentals, because I actually started in the long-term rental space in 2019 and I immediately got out of it once I discovered this one thing. There is almost zero tax benefits that you take. So the reality is with long-term rentals, those investments are actually amortized over a 27.5-year period. And what happens is every single year you take that amount, so whatever the total purchase price is, basically divide that by 27.5. That's the amount that you're offsetting against your total taxable income. And when you actually look at the numbers, it is almost negligible, which is exactly why I got out of long-term rentals literally 6 weeks after I started my journey. So once most clients do the research and understand, okay, long-term rentals, there's almost zero cash flow when you actually factor in the interest rates right now and the environment with capital expenditures, repairs, maintenance, everything else that goes into upkeep for the property. They now shift over to another opportunity, which is typically multifamily, and they get sold a dream where, similar to long-term rentals, there's also going to be guaranteed cash flow. You can invest with partners and you can basically keep it as hands off as possible, but have slightly better returns. Well, the problem right now with multifamily is there is so little cash flow in long-term rentals. So a lot of those investors started trickling over into multifamily. And what's basically happened over the last few years is that space has gotten insanely competitive. And the reality is you absolutely can have massive cash flow from your multifamily investments. But the problem with multifamily is it's essentially going to become another full-time job for you. The reality is the best multifamily investors, because I know a few of them right now, they spend literally hundreds of hours from the day that they close on that multifamily property in order to improve the cash flow, improve their net operating income, reduce expenses, find tenants, evict tenants, and do all this rigmarole. And what ends up happening is, unless you are an exceptionally gifted real estate investor already, multifamily just becomes a headache. And the worst part about this is you don't really get any tax benefits once again, because that investment is long-term tenants' passive income. So you can't use depreciation from an asset like a multifamily purchase to offset your active income. So based on those blend of metrics for both long-term rentals and multifamily, we say it's not ideal. If you're a high income earner, you already have a high income earning job, you're not trying to be completely passive with your long-term rental investments and get almost no cash flow and almost no tax benefits, versus also multifamily, which is going to be pretty high intensity in terms of the time commitments, and then also not really any tax benefits. So that brings us to the one true way with short-term rentals. So outside of having the best net effective tax savings and cash flow that come with owning these properties, one of the most appealing things about Airbnbs is that it's the easiest real estate investing journey to nail end to end. So when we get a little further in the video, we're going to talk about the 3 key things, and it's so easy to get these right if you're experienced. But if you're a novice or you're doing this for the first time, it's very mission critical to get them all right, or the real estate investment just tanks. The 3 things to get right are: number 1, the right market; number 2, the right property type within that market, because there are certain homes that cash flow really, really well, and then certain types of homes that don't cash flow at all. And then number 3, it's nailing the design. So very simple, unique amenities or approaches to designing custom walls, custom experiences throughout the Airbnb. It is so easy to just look at everything else in the market that is already performing, use the copycat method of just making your home slightly better, and you will have almost zero risk when it comes to closing on a home, trying to optimize for the cash flow if you just do these 3 things correctly. Now, even though this is the easiest of the 3 approaches with long-term rentals, multifamily, and then short-term, it is the easiest to get right. The problem still is, unless you spend all day, every day doing all the following stuff that we're gonna break down the right way, you will have a massive headache when it comes time to get the cash flow or be compliant with everything that you're doing. And then you may end up needing to sell the home within 3 to 6 months of actually closing on the property, which absolutely sucks. So now that we're clear on the motivation behind actually doing short-term rentals, some blend of, hey, I'm now making a lot of money, I'm losing a lot of money, or I'm worth a lot of money, and I need a better asset or I need a better vehicle of deploying my wealth into every single year that helps me get back some of my wealth that would otherwise go to funding an inefficient government. I've now clarified where are my problem areas. So I'm making a lot of money, I'm losing a lot of money. What am I trying to transform in my life? Well, I still make a lot of money, but now I keep more of my money. I've now transformed into somebody who's labeled as an investor. So my friends, my family, my peers all look up to me as that guy who buys 1 to 2 Airbnbs every single year. He's building his portfolio. Everybody on the block wants to be like me. Now that I'm clear on those things, what I want to get into next is, okay, the tax thing. This is the final item that I just need clarity on before I actually go all in on this. I'm clear on long-term rentals are not the way. Multifamily is not the best opportunity vehicle for me unless I'm already a super seasoned real estate investor. The tax is the final roadblock getting in the way, so let's just quickly review it. And before I dive into this, and before people comment on this video, I am certainly not a CPA. I'm not a licensed enrolled agent. I'm not a tax advisor. I'm not licensed to give or interpret anything about tax code and give you direct one-on-one advice. But what I can share is this. Fundamentally, the approach to identifying the short-term rental loophole and actually staying within the guidelines is actually pretty simple. So I'm going to give you my very simple, oversimplified take on this. If you are somebody who's going to go down this route, what you also need to recognize is there are over 160 million tax returns that are filed in the US every single year. And in any given year, there are maybe 100,000 to 250,000 that have to do with the short-term rental loophole, or somebody who basically bought an Airbnb this year, qualified for real estate professional status by spending 100 hours in the business, keeping all the short-term stays on average under 7 days on average, so that you're actually running it as an Airbnb, and then participating 100 hours, but no less than any other individual. Well, the volume of those returns and the volume of CPAs who actually know this stuff and who actually spend all their time working with clients who actually are short-term rental investors, it's 0.1% of the total population. If you think about 160 million tax returns filed, maybe 100 to 150,000, 250,000 every single year are short-term rental specific. That's not 1% of the population, that's 0.1%. So all this disclaimer is just basically making sure if you talk to your CPA, they probably are clueless when it comes to this stuff, and that's okay. So what I'll say is always, always, always connect with a CPA who already is doing this for hopefully hundreds of clients every single year. They specialize in this. They know this stuff backwards and forwards. I'm going to give you my really, really quick guide and breakdown so that you can at least have clarity before you go and connect with a CPA who specializes in this so they can support you. All right, so there are 3 main criteria for closing on Airbnb properties the year that you buy them, running them successfully as short-term rentals, and then being able to qualify for the tax savings. The first one is the year that you buy the home, the property actually needs to be placed in service. So if it's 2025 right now, you will buy and close on that home this calendar year. You will get it live as a short-term rental. That's the first material participation test. The second item that you need to knock out is ensuring that the property is actually ran as a short-term rental. So this means that the average duration of stay at the property is 7 days or less. Now that basically excludes people who are running long-term rentals. So if you think about it this way, if you have one tenant staying in the home for 365 days throughout the calendar year, the average duration of stay is 365. 365 days is more than 7 days. That's why long-term rentals won't pass this test. For medium-term rentals, some people will typically get guests coming in there for 30 to 90 days at a time. Well, if you take the total number of days that the guests stayed at the home, divided by the total number of stays for each individual guest or group of guests, those average duration of stays are maybe 30, 45, 60 days at a time. Those do not qualify as short-term rentals. When you launch the property as an Airbnb, on average, most people are going to stay around 2 to 3 days at a time. There'll be some people who stay 4, 7, 10, even 12, 15 days at a time. So long as you're running the property as an Airbnb or VRBO, you'll have no issues getting this property qualifying for the second material participation test, which is under 7 days on average. And then the third item, and this is probably the most important item for you to just review and get clarity on with your CPA, is minimum 100 hours need to be materially participated in by you, or if you're filing your returns jointly with a spouse, you and your spouse, and then specifically no less time than any one individual. Now, let me explain what this means. So what the IRS wants to see is basically confirmation on if you are running a short-term rental business, you are actively participating so that it's not a passive income activity. And this final set of criteria is really important for you to document accurately so that you have clarity around producing your hours to the IRS so that it's very, very clear you actively participated in the business. You did it for at least 100 hours, which you comfortably will so long as you follow these guidelines, and that you spent no less time than any other individual, which basically means if there was another individual that spent 80, 120, 130 hours on the calendar year working on this business in some capacity, you spent more and significantly more than them. So here are the basic guidelines to make sure that you do this organically and actually front load most of your participation up front, doing the most important and also enjoyable stuff in the business. And then as time goes on, continuously participating, but doing it in a small yet significant way so that it keeps the whole process from managing the property as turnkey as possible, but you're still cooperating cooperating with the co-host and still co-participating in the business. So what most people organically do after closing on the home within a few days or the next weekend or 2 weeks out, 3 weeks out, 4 weeks out is they will typically visit the property and do what are called property enhancements or very basic low degree of difficulty design projects, things like accent walls, paint jobs on the walls, so geometric shape patterns, sponge painting on the walls, murals, or doing things like accent walls where you're using vertical panels of wood. You've probably seen these in boutique hotels, motels, etc. These really, really simple design projects that you can also use a general contractor or a designer or a mural artist to coincide with your presence at the property so that you guys can do these things together. You don't need to show up with the hammers, the saws, the tools. You're not swinging hammers doing rehab projects at the property, but you will show up and demonstrate that, hey, I am actively materially participating in the business. And the simple litmus test is this. If my participation didn't exist doing this thing that I'm documenting, would the performance of the business suffer as a result? So things like you showing up at the property, you game planning your designs, you game planning and coordinating all this stuff to make sure that the property actually looks good once it goes live on Airbnb. If you spend a 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5-day weekend going to the property, especially if you bring your spouse, your average waking hours are going to be maybe 16 hours per day while you're at the property. You maybe take 2, 3, 4, 5 hours of breaks throughout the day. The 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 hours that you're at the property actively participating in improving the business. So you're either painting yourself or you're overseeing the general contractor who's there. While they're there, you're maybe sitting on your computer, game planning other furniture that you're going to order, making trips back and forth to Home Depot or another boutique furniture store, etc. All these hours materially affect the business and your performance of the property. So what's really important is to document those maybe 40, 60, 100, 120 hours that both you and your spouse, because again, if you are filing jointly with a spouse, both your hours can materially contribute to your total participation. It's really important that you log those hours and document, because everything that you do after you leave the property is mostly going to be just checking in on Airbnb, the app on your phone or maybe on your computer, checking in on the listings and doing two things. Number one, just checking in and seeing that the guest communications are looking good. Your co-host is probably going to do most of the legwork communicating with the guests, but you might check into the app maybe 15, 30 minutes, 60 minutes every day or every other day or every 2 or 3 days. And as time goes on, you'll probably get more hands off. But during the first 3 to 6 months after you close on the home, you're not going to micromanage your co-host or that property management group who's managing the property for you. But what you will do is you'll take a little bit of time every single day just to check in, making sure that the guests are taken care of. You might see that the co-host missed a message. So you might message your co-host team and say, hey, do we need to get back to Sally and make sure that they got towels because we just identified, hey, they just came back from this whitewater rafting trip in Colorado. They're at the home and they have no towels. So the cleaning team needs to head over. Are you guys on top of this? So very basic things like this. So to close the loop, you will log your hours when you visit the property, when you're doing things like checking in on guests, checking in on the listing itself, and more so overseeing what the co-hosting team is doing. This way you can front load maybe 40 to 80 hours on the low end or 80 to 160 hours on the high end over your first weekend long visit to the property. And then every single week and every month, you're maybe doing 1 to 4 hours a week, maybe 3 to 15 hours per month, every single month until the end of the year. And at the end of the year, the very first year that you've owned and operated the property as an Airbnb, congratulations, you've now satisfied the material participation requirements. You do not need to document any of these hours in year 2, 3, 4, and beyond. But what you will want to do is also make sure you put together a very simple list of estimates for the hours that everybody else and each individual in the business is contributing to the management or the improvement of this property. So your CPA should also encourage you to put together an estimated list of all the other people who are participating in the business. So maybe cleaning teams, individuals with them, co-hosting teams, property managers, revenue managers within the property management team, and put together an estimated number of hours that each of those teams and then the individuals within them have actually contributed on the business this year. Now, what's great is you can very easily accurately estimate and accurately project their numbers, because if you follow these key steps, your number should be so much significantly higher than everybody else's. There's almost no way that any one individual should be contributing more in this business than you. And then for further clarity on the tax stuff, which I'll talk about in another video, you would order a cost segregation study, the end of the year or the beginning of the following year after you've closed and ran that home, the cost segregation study will spit back a bonus depreciation amount, so a typical amount that you can offset against your total taxable income. And then your CPA will take that report. They might make some small adjustments to it after they revise it, send that final version of a cost segregation study, and then the final amounts that they believe should be accelerated into year one for bonus depreciation. When they file your returns, they'll include that as an addendum to your tax return so that the IRS can actually review that you got a third-party cost segregation study, which spat back a value to you for bonus depreciation. Your CPA reviewed it. That is going to be included in your tax return when you file it the following year. All right, this is a lot. We're halfway there, guys. So if you like this video, please give a like and subscribe. We produce all kinds of content like this for free. If you are interested in working with us, just click the link in our description and we'll show you exactly how we're doing this for hundreds of clients. Now let's dive into how do we make sure that the property is going to cash flow. So the way that we ensure that every one of our clients' properties is actually going to cash flow once they buy the property, take it over, get the design right, and then go live with it as a short-term rental, it boils down to three main things. Number one, we want to make sure we're actually buying homes in the right markets. This is a product of having what we call a yield, a high ratio between what those properties can gross in terms of short-term rental income or revenue relative to their purchase price. And we want this yield number to be in this magical ratio of at least 15% to 20%. So for example, we're looking at a lot of homes in the area that just happen to be $1 million in purchase price for simple math. A 15 to 20% yield would indicate that the property is able to gross at least $150,000 to $200,000 per year. And what that gives us is a high level of certainty that we know the property's income is going to be significantly higher than the annual expenses on that property every single year. Because for reference, depending upon the type of deal and depending upon the area, the property taxes that you pay, the insurance that you pay, or interest rate that you're paying for the year, most properties will fall into a range where the annual operating expenses or a yield expense ratio for what they spend to run the business, including the debt pay down, everything on the home, is somewhere between 11% to maybe 15%. Now, there are obviously outliers either way, but that's a good estimate range. So the first item is just making sure that you're buying properties in areas where the yield percentage on the average type of home that you're looking at buying in that area is actually above 15 to 20% on average, because you know your annual operating expenses are going to be roughly between 11 to 15% of the total purchase price on the home. That's the first step. And for reference, here's a list of some of the top performing areas that we've already ran this audit on multiple times over. These are the areas, and most of these we do deals in almost every single month, every single week of the year. But for reference, we've ran this analysis on hundreds, if not thousands of cities over the past 5 years. These are some of our top performing markets where there's actually inventory available for these types of homes right now, which brings me to the next section, which is section number 2, making sure that you're actually looking at the right property types that cash flow better than everything else in the market. So one of my favorite things to review with clients is that Airbnb actually has tremendous product market fit, and there's a specific category of sizes of homes that Airbnb properties do exceptionally well on versus other sizes of homes. And the reason is Airbnb is actually serving a very specific audience that no other type of industry can serve. Allow me to explain. So throughout the US, on average, most people are going to be staying in hotels when they travel, because the average traveler is traveling with themselves solo, or maybe one or two other people that they're with, maybe a small family. But on average, most travel stays are going to be needing only 1 to 2 beds and maybe 1 to 2 bedrooms. And this is literally why hotels do exceptionally well, because 90% of every single hotel stays are always just going to be small individuals or small group travel. Sometimes they'll obviously be doing conferences at larger hotels, larger ceremonies, graduation ceremonies, wedding ceremonies, what have you. But on average, hotels, their use case, their product market fit is 1, 2, maybe groups of 4 to 6 people traveling. That is their niche. So the problem is, throughout the last few years, you've been seeing these hashtags around Airbnb bust. Well, the reality is, those people who are claiming that stuff are typically the people who are also trying to, whether they know it or not, compete with hotels. So they closed on 1, 2, maybe 3 bedroom homes, and they're not luxury homes. Well, the reality is, anybody who's going to be traveling either individually or in a small group, it's just so much easier and more convenient for them to just book a hotel. They're in and out like that. They don't need to deal with an Airbnb host. They don't need to deal with the uncertainty of, is the quality control going to be really good? Am I actually, finding a good super host? Do I know that the whole property stay is going to be amazing? Whereas larger group travel, specifically larger groups of people, maybe 8 to 10 on the small end, but closer to 12, 14, 16, 18, even 20 people, these types of groups, They want intimacy. They want an experience. They don't necessarily want to be in a hotel where they're going to have to order multiple rooms and pair up 1 to 2 people, 2 to 4 people in each room, and then have nowhere to convene. They don't have a living room. They don't have a balcony. They don't have their own private area where they can have fun, be intimate together, throw down music, play games, etc. This is where Airbnb's true product market fit comes into play. So Airbnb and all the other short-term rental platforms, they all have narrowed down. If you want to serve a large group of people who are traveling, again, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20 people plus, they would have to probably pay a hotel for a combination of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 plus rooms. Depending upon what they're paying per night, maybe $200 to $600 per room, that budget for what they'd be needing to pay per night can easily be over $1,000 to $12,000 per night, to all the way over $2,000, $3,000, even $4,000 per night. So the alternative, which is actually a better solution for them, is to typically book an Airbnb. So a larger property, something like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 bedrooms. Oftentimes 4, 5, 6 bedrooms is going to be the sweet spots depending upon the area. Those types of homes can comfortably serve groups of 10, 12, 14, 16 people, which is going to be your typical average traveler avatar. And those people would happily pay anywhere from $600, $900, $1,200, $1,500, even up to $2,000 to $3,000 per night, because their alternative is going to a hotel, having no group element to the stay. They can't bring all their stuff. They can't leave all their stuff in common areas. They can't gather around a living room. They can't watch TV together. They can't play games in their own private space together. They can't go out into the balcony, go into the backyard. You get the idea. So this is really where Airbnb has nailed their unique service proposition, or their unique value proposition, where they're able to just serve larger groups of family travel, group travel, bachelorette parties, bachelor parties, wedding ceremonies, graduation ceremonies, commencements, you name it. All of these types of family or group friend travel scenarios, everybody does that on Airbnb. So if you want to fast forward to what types of properties actually cash flow the best, it is clearly these. So this is the reason, for example, in almost every market, we only look at 4-bedroom, 5-bedroom, 6-bedroom homes, because those are going to cash flow much, much better. And that is the second element. So just nailing the property type, or specifically the sub-markets and sub-property types that cash flow way better than every other property type or size in that area. And then item number 3 to make sure that you nail is the design, the vibes, how you're creating this experience for your Airbnb and your traveler guest stays, how you're presenting it with photos and the staging, and then how you're actually optimizing it and managing it with a co-host. But all this starts with the design. Okay, so I love sharing my story on this because I have definitely made mistakes and stepped on landmines along my journey in short-term rental investing. So in 2021, my first 2 properties that I closed on, I got all of these steps right for one of the properties, and I got one of these key steps wrong for one of the other properties. So in 2021, I started my short-term rental investing journey just outside of Denver, Colorado, in Westminster, Colorado. I lived in downtown Denver. I knew friends who were investing in the area. I knew realtors who were investing in the area. I knew that it was a cash flow market. I didn't go through these 3 steps like I wish I would have, that I have access to now, but I pretty much nailed everything right, starting with the market. So this market is great because the average yield, when I actually look back on this in 2021, the average yield in that area was around 12 to 19%, and I happened to choose 2 homes, which did pretty well on that yield analysis, so I knew the market was definitely the right one. Fast forwarding to the design stuff. So on each of those homes that I closed on, we definitely nailed the design. The first one that I did was a business partner. He did a phenomenal job furnishing, designing the home. He nailed everything as far as the staging, the photos. The listing looked exceptional. And then for the second home that I did that year, this one I took the model and the blueprint from doing that first deal with a partner, and then I turned around a month later and closed on my own home. I also nailed the design on this one. So this one I actually paid a designer. I think all in, furniture-wise and the design stuff, everything was around $25,000 to $30,000 all in, which was just around $10 per square foot, including the designer fee, all the furniture, all the design elements, everything. And now here comes the tale of 2 Airbnb listings. Here was the fundamental difference. I got the right market. I was in the exact same market. Both these properties were like 8 blocks from each other, and I nailed the design on both of them. But there was one fundamental reason why the property that I closed on myself has generated way more cash flow and net cash flow than the one that I closed on with a partner, and it literally boiled down to one simple thing. It was the number of bedrooms. So here in this market of Westminster, there's even more nuance when you just stair step up between 4 bedrooms, 5 bedrooms, 6 bedrooms. There is this kind of invisible hand of an upper limit on what is the upper limit of gross income that a property can do based on those number of bedrooms. And for the average, around 80 to 90% of these homes, obviously there are some super luxury ones that are like 3, 4, 5 bedrooms and they just are way outside these typical parameters. But on average, the homes that I was going to be competing with for 4 bedrooms, the upper limit, let's just say for simple math, was around $80,000 per year. And the upper limit around what 5 bedrooms could do is around $115,000 per year. So when I actually looked at this, there was around a $25,000, $30,000, $35,000 difference in terms of gross income, the upper limit, on what a home could do just based on its bedroom count. So what was really interesting about both of these homes is they were very, very close in purchase price. One was for $560,000 and the other one was a $620,000 home. Now the larger home was a $620,000 home. It was a 5-bedroom home. I got both of these for crazy low interest rates. The monthly payments on these was maybe around $200, $250 in difference. And even though I got the right market and I got the right design type, the number one differentiator on these homes was, as you guessed it, one home grossed around $20,000 to $25,000 more on average every single year. The other home was $20,000 to $25,000 less. One home pretty much breaks even every single year. The other home, it's like $15,000 to $25,000 in net cash flow every single year. So let this be a lesson to you. If you're thinking of doing this on your own, we probably as a team would have caught that for you. Now, when I started my journey in 2021, I didn't have a team around me. I just had people who were kind of telling me, an agent who does short-term rentals, she was like, yeah, this is a great home. And then for the second home, when I used the same agent, yeah, this is also a great home. Everybody was like, yeah, hype, hype, hype. Let's just close on home. But in reality, if I had done a little more due diligence and I just knew this one subtle nuance, I would have probably saved myself the headache and not closed on that first home. Probably would have still worked with that same business partner, but would have just tried to optimize for a slightly larger home. Okay, so tangential story time over, back to the design. So the number one thing that you need to nail, once you've got the right market and then the right property type, now design is literally the most influential thing that you can do, the biggest lever that you can pull once you've closed on the deal. And after running this program for almost 5 years, helping clients, ever since the year I closed on homes, I started doing this as a service for other people. And then we formally launched this program in this company just under 4 years ago. What I did wrong in the beginning of my journey was I also told people, hey, the only thing you need to get right is the market and then the specific property type within that market. Design, there are so many people who travel out here. There are only so many Airbnbs available. Whether you're designed all the way like Great Gatsby style, like you've done everything right, nailed the photography, everything, or you just kind of do what I was doing in my second year of doing this, you don't really lean into the design super heavily, I don't think there's going to be a difference. You're going to be fine either way. Well, I quickly learned that that was not the case. So right before we launched this program, I made a point of letting every client know we're going to do a custom design call. So around a few days before you actually close on the property, we'll do a 30 to 60 minute design call where we talk about the highest tier 1 types of improvements and enhancements you can make to the home, other amenities that you can add in. And what we now do is we do custom design reviews for every single property that we close on. I'm going to give you the short list of some of the tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 designs and what all that means, so you can go into your short-term rental search and your journey of closing on a home and getting the design right and fast forward through all the mistakes and having to come back and then add these designs in later so that you max out the cash flow. So my tier 1 list starts with a general contractor who just comes in, spends 1 to 5 days at the home and is just improving all the normal wear and tear stuff that just happens with properties over time. So think things like basic paint on the walls, taking care of cabinets that don't open and close properly, stucco, trims, things on the exterior where they can just go in, spend 5 minutes to an hour and just solve and make the home look and feel so much better. There is massive ROI on just nailing these basics. Now, items number 2 and 3 are more of the design element that have to do with the fit and feel of the home. The first is accent walls that have to do with things like paint, so geometric shape patterns, textured paint patterns, things like sponge patterns. I'll show some examples on the screen. These add so much value in terms of vibe and the experience that you're pitching to your guests before they show up at the home and then while they're there. And then my other favorite component to accent walls basically includes these vertical panels of wood. So these wood panels, these 3D accent walls, they do an exceptionally good job of making the home look and feel more professional, more higher end. You will get massive return just from doing these 1, 2, and 3 things with a general contractor just coming through for the small wear and tear stuff, the accent walls for the paint, geometric paint patterns, etc. And then the third item for your 3D panel accent walls, massive, massive ROI. You will differentiate yourself from 95% of listings just doing these 3 things. So the way we order these tiers before getting into tier 2 is tier 1 is these are no-brainer items that kind of need to get done the first week or the first month before you actually go live with your listing. And they really don't require anything more than like 1 to 2 days on average for each individual item. They can also be offloaded to another general contractor, a designer, a mural artist, etc. So tier 1 stuff is like, hey, need to do these. You really shouldn't list the property and launch it before you get these things done. Tier 2 stuff, it's very, very ideal. For 90% of clients, I'll tell them definitely get the Tier 2 items done as well before you launch the listing. But if you're really strapped for time, if you're launching into some weird season where there's just so many people that are going to book right now, and you need to wait until a slower month, maybe like a September or a January, to do some of these other design or enhancement items. Tier 2 stuff, you can wait, but I still advise doing as much, if not all of this, right from the jump. So for Tier 2 items, before even diving into the shortlist, this is always driven by competitive analysis. So what we'll always do is we'll build this little matrix of all the other top performing homes in that category. So if we're looking at 5-bedroom homes in the Poconos, for example, we'll look at all the other 5-bedroom homes that are really, really close by and with similar proximity to other unique amenities or unique things on the stay. So for example, if we're looking at homes that are right on the water, we'll look at other 5-bedroom homes that are also right on the water. If we're looking at other 5-bedroom homes that are maybe 3 to 5 blocks away from some body of water, but aren't right on top of it, no unique views, no other crazy unique elements to the experience, we'll try and look at only those and then come up with this matrix of everything that every listing has, everything that every listing doesn't have. And if we recognize these trends and patterns, we can diagnose with extreme certainty what are the actual revenue driving amenities, enhancements, design items, things like hot tubs, things like pools, things like saunas, things like putting greens, etc. Those are going to be the things that we look at and determine, hey, should we add these items in if the property doesn't already have it, or should we skip them because they're nice to haves but not actual revenue drivers? So let's go through that short list of Tier 2 items. So the most common items that we tell clients to add in are combinations of the following. Hot tubs are one of the easiest revenue drivers to identify in certain areas. Now, most already performing short-term rentals will probably already have one. If you see that hot tubs are a revenue driver and yours doesn't already have one, very, very easy to know, hey, I got to budget an extra $7,000 to $12,000 depending upon the area and depending upon the size of the hot tub that you want to do for delivering and then installing this. Just make sure you actually run your analysis and your comps to know before you drop 10 grand on a hot tub if it's actually a revenue driving amenity. The second most typical one, and this is my favorite under the radar one, is a mini putting green. So what's crazy cool is guys obviously love golf. When I survey guests, I've had properties where I didn't have a putting green. I had properties where I added them in, and then I had repeat guests and I had them come back and I asked, hey, did you like the addition of this putting green? Did you like the fact that there were other cool, unique design elements that I added in? And what I always get feedback on is putting greens are great for guys, for ladies, for couples, for families, for travelers that are in groups like bachelorette parties. Pretty much every avatar likes the addition of having this in, even when you're in an area that has all 4 seasons, even if the area is covered in snow. Obviously, during the rest of the year, it's a super value add. But what you need to make sure is have at least 1 to 2 examples of other high-performing properties in your area that have already done this before you get it added in. On average, most of my clients end up budgeting around 2 to 3 days for a landscaping team to come in. They'll typically rip up the grass and then decide based on the weather environment that you're in or the seasonality of that area, if they can just lay the AstroTurf and then pound and flatten and fit it, and then just come back a day later and make sure everything has settled properly, drill 2 holes, and then voila, you have your mini putting green. That's one of my favorite additional amenities to add in that drive revenue for Tier 2 items. For the sake of this video, I'm pretty much going to cap it there because everything else that happens beyond this is a little more nuanced and very, very unique. There are things like adding in backyard games, adding in wallpaper design. So in addition to the Tier 1 stuff of accent walls with paint, accent walls with wood panels, you can also do very high quality wallpaper. There are also small things depending on the property in the area, like light fixtures, going to Home Depot or Amazon and spending $50 to $500 on unique light fixtures. Those go really far as well. And there are other core elements that pretty much every property really needs. For example, larger dining room tables that look really, really nice, whether they're wood, whether they're glass, being able to seat comfortably 8 to 16 people depending upon the size of your home. There are so many other elements, but these are the general ones to just think and consider when you're looking at a property and just knowing, hey, I need to be able to compete with other homes that are doing 110, 130, 150,000, $200,000 per year. Always make sure you're assessing what needs to be done for the design, if there's any furniture that needs to be replaced, if there are any other unique amenities that need to get added in. We'll always put together a budget for our clients that we suggest based on the property type, and all the comps in the area. But if you're doing this on your own, do not skimp on the design. I have personally made this mistake. I course corrected really, really quickly. Within 6 months later, I went back to my properties that I had skipped the design element on. I got it fixed, and then boom, suddenly cash flow. Really, really simple addition. Make sure you don't skip it. Make sure you don't delay it. Always do it right after you close on the property. Don't wait 6 months to learn at a later date, oh, I really skipped that one thing that's going to drive most of my revenue. Okay, so now we're clear on the pain of doing nothing, what you're actually trying to optimize for, and the transformation or the before and after approach that you will take or that you will experience once you actually close on a home and now you're no longer, having these massive tax bill issues. You're now cash flowing. You're now assuming the identity of a savvy investor. But one of the things that happens at this stage, once clients are in the process of starting to look at homes and then run through these three metrics of, is it a great market? Is it a great property type? And then specifically, can we cash flow based on the design? What I will put you at ease with is, I have seen so many clients go live with properties in great markets and phenomenal property types. All you really need to focus on when you're thinking about whether or not you should move forward with a home is, do you feel good about the design? Do you feel good about the amenities? And do you have the capacity to show up for a 2, 3, 4-day weekend? If you can show up just for a weekend, I am not kidding. No BS. If you can show up for a weekend, we have put together such significant game plans to get 90% of this done in that short 2, 3, 4-day period of time. And then what most clients end up doing is they will leave the property, and in the next 2, 3, 4, or 5 days, there might be a general contractor, a designer, or 1 or 2 other people who are somehow engaged with improving the design and the enhancements of the property. You will already be better than 95% of other listings in your area, almost guaranteed. If you just remember, if you want cash flow, show up to the property and do the design. I can't stress this enough. If you've nailed the market, if you've nailed the property type, and you're uncertain about whether or not you will cash flow, just know that based on data, if you nail the design and when you nail the design, you will launch with the right staging, the right photography, and then the right pricing mechanics from your co-host, your property manager. So before I segue into, now that you've nailed the design, all you need to nail is the theming and then the photography. Just know this, if you literally put in a little bit of effort, you will win big. The majority of Airbnb investors are very, very lazy investors. They get massive tax benefits. They don't need a ton of cash flow. They can even lose money on these homes. So when you see that a lot of your competition hasn't indexed well for the design stuff, just know if you want cash flow in that market, you can definitely outperform 90% of the market just nailing these fundamentals, which we talked about on the design. And now let's get into my second favorite item, which is making sure that we stage the property before we take photos and then absolutely nail the photos. So one of the most common items that we see from homes that we buy for clients is they are typically mismanaged, or they have bad listing photos or poorly staged, or a combination of all of the above. So let me explain. So every year we close on all kinds of homes that are in great markets. They're the right property types, and through a combination of either the host or the seller self-managing the property themselves, meaning they're not doing it professionally, or engaging somebody like a family member, a cousin, a son, a daughter, a mother, a father, whomever, to manage the property. They're just doing a terrible job, and it starts with the way they staged the property and the way they took photos. So you would be amazed how many properties we've taken over where clients have barely put in $5,000 to $15,000 worth of enhancements. So a general contractor coming through for 2 to 5 days, maybe replacing a sofa or some other small furniture items, adding in a couple accent walls, all in for maybe $8,000 to $15,000, $8,000 to $20,000, and then literally going live, but with an almost identical listing, just outside of the few 1 to 2 rooms that we made design enhancements in. But the main thing that they did differently is they staged the property well, and they absolutely nailed the photography. So I put together another really quick video talking about the staging, but staging basically boils down to this. We have a dining room table, and it's a tale of two cities right here. We have one dining room side that is maxed out with all these staging elements. I'm talking really nice plates, place settings, knives and forks, wine glasses, maybe a vase with some flowers. That photo and the way that it's taken versus what we call a naked dining room table, which doesn't give any vibes or any elements of like what the experience is going to be like when you actually go visit the property while you're there. That type of photo, and if you can take an element of that across most of the rooms and most of the photos that you put into your listing, you again will get another massive lift on your listing. And the reality is, if you budget around $600 to $1,000 to give to your photographer for a combination of across 2 days, day one, they're just going to go to these party supply stores and buy all of the coolest plates, place settings, napkins, forks and knives, wine glasses, vases, flowers, all these other super cool, unique things for places like the dining room. Things like the living room, they might go and get more flowers and vases. For the bedrooms, what they might also do is get these unique towel designs. So if they don't know how to fold towels themselves, you can literally go to party stores, get pre-folded towel designs. You can put these in your bedrooms and just build the experience, build on the vibes that you're conveying to the guests who are going to come through and stay at the property. Because again, if you do this, you will completely separate yourself from every other co-host in the area. And again, all this is for the purpose of making it easy for your co-host or your property manager to absolutely nail the design stuff, to absolutely nail the listing and the pricing dynamics that they have, so they can maximize your occupancy and maximize the average daily rate that they're charging. Okay, so at this stage, we've covered a lot about right property type within the right market and then the design, and now we've covered the staging and the actual photography for the home. Now let's talk about another common pitfall where most people get things wrong, which is using the right co-host. So a co-host or a property manager in the short-term rental space, we use the terminology co-host because it gives the assumption that you're also participating in some capacity along different stages of your short-term rental investing journey. At the beginning, you're very much front-loading your participation, and then ongoing, you're maybe spending 1 to 3 hours a week or 3 to 15 hours per month, depending upon the week and the month, just sort of collaborating with the co-host. But what's important is getting the right one from the jump, and here's how. So over the last 5 years of running my own short-term rentals, I have learned that there are very different types of co-hosts with different skills, and then they are at very different stages in their business. Here's what I want to forewarn you about before choosing a co-host. So obviously, number one, you want to choose somebody who's got a great track record in the area. For you, if you're not working with us, the way that you can do this is going on Facebook travel groups. So there are typically investor groups, travel groups, and oftentimes you can just make a post in there saying, hey, I'm looking to buy a home in Davenport, Florida. I'm looking for a co-host who does a really good job for you. Can anybody recommend one? Well, depending upon the size of the group, you might get 10 to 100,000 comments of people suggesting, hey, here's my co-host, don't use anybody else. That is a great way to start the process of finding and then begin vetting different co-hosts. So outside of the Facebook groups, you can also talk to different investors if you already know other people in those areas, but typically those are going to be the people who often comment on the posts. You can typically DM them. You can ask them to give you a quick audio breakdown via an audio message or a voice message as how has the experience been with your co-host, and then you can start the next process, which is vetting the co-hosts in those areas. When you're vetting a co-host, what you really want to start with is just number one, how many listings do you already manage in the area? What's your track record been? And then can you give me a few examples of a listing that was underperforming, what you did or what the owner did in terms of either design or recreating the listing or improving your pricing dynamics? Can you tell me what you did to right the ship and get that listing to perform well again? So 90% of co-hosts won't be able to give you all three of these things. They won't be able to produce a track record of properties that they have in the area, how they've actually righted the ship, and then also a breakdown of maybe a case study or an example reference if they want to introduce you to a client of theirs who can vouch for their services. What I would always recommend is do not manage the property on your own, at least for the first 6 to 12 months. Always, always, always use a co-host, because the reality is a co-host who spends all day, every day managing properties is probably going to do a better job of optimizing the listing and then maximizing the occupancy and the average daily rate much better than you will on your first attempt. And then best case practices for once your co-host is selected, you get the property live and now you're working together. What I would always recommend is if you're working with a brand new co-host, I would recommend auditing their work on a weekly basis, going through the following SOP or a very simple checklist to ensure that there are no issues with the home and that they're actually maximizing revenue. So the short version of this checklist is, number one, have you gotten a report from the cleaning team that goes through every room in the home and asked if they've identified any issues, any broken items, or any other problems along the way? The second is basically testing all the amenities in the home. The most common objections or the most common frustrations that you're going to get from guests as they show up and something in the home doesn't work. For example, a pool might not be getting warm, a hot tub might not be working. There might not be warm or cold water in some of the rooms. The AC might be broken, the furnace might be broken, etc. What you always want to make sure is you put together a checklist for your co-hosts to run with the cleaning teams to check in and get ahead of proactively of any issues at the home, so that when the next guest checks in, they're not the ones who are notifying you, hey, the check-in is going smooth, everything is great so far. The only issue is I discovered the water heater isn't working, or I discovered the hot tub isn't working, or my kids tried to turn on the TV, but they can't get access to Netflix. Just basic stuff like this. I know it sounds really, really fundamental and rudimentary, but you are living off of your guests' reviews, so you want to make sure you're doing everything as much as possible to maximize the average 5-star rating that you get from almost all your guests. Now, your co-hosts are going to have or should have a much more robust set of SOPs that are followed every single clean or every turn, which is a guest checking out and then a new guest checking in. Every other turn, weekly, monthly. There's also maintenance stuff that they typically run, which is a product of, having the cleaning teams who are at the property kind of give you updates. So those are my most important SOPs and checklists that I'd recommend for you, starting with the co-host and how they interact with the cleaning team, who's basically your boots on the ground people checking in and out of the property pretty much every single week. The next thing that I would double check on has to do with the listing itself and then the guest communications. What I would recommend is the first month that you're working with your co-host team and every so often, check on the listing just to make sure, number one, the listing is actually live. I mean, literally clicking on the hyperlink or the permalink or the URL that goes directly to your listing. You can find this in your Airbnb account. You can also ask this from your co-host. Just check and make sure it's actually active. You would be amazed how many 3 to 7 day periods listings go down or get disabled or get banned for whatever reason, whether legitimate or not. Always make sure you're checking in on this very regularly just to know that your property is even available and searchable and that it shows up in searches when guests are trying to book in your area. Number two, make sure you're checking in and just seeing what the guest communications look like. So most co-hosts will have what are called automations. They're automated messages that go out based on a guest making the booking within 1 or 2 days before the check-in date, the day of, a few hours into the day of the checking date, afternoon, evening, and then the day after they check in. So oftentimes, guests will sometimes include links to guides in certain areas or other resources, and they might not be accurate based on this listing and this property. So what you always want to make sure is just check the automations, check the guest communication, and then also secondarily to this, make sure that your host or your co-host is actually serving the guest well with their replies. You'd be amazed how many times a simple 3-star, 2-star, 4-star review could have been avoided if you just checked in and then asked your co-host team, hey, by the way, I saw this message to Sally. This doesn't look like it's replying to what she's actually asking. Did you or an assistant or a virtual assistant just kind of get the reply wrong? Can you just check in on this? So that's a really easy way to audit and support the co-host and collaborate on this rather than it feeling like you're micromanaging them. Just kind of guess and checking their work as far as the listing being live always, and then also making sure the guest communications are flawless. And then the final element to the equation. So now you've got a cash flowing Airbnb, your co-host is managing it really well. Just to close the loop on the tax stuff once again, when you're screening and talking to potential CPAs to work with, one of the very first questions you always want to ask, especially if you're getting friction from a CPA who doesn't know anything about the short-term rental stuff or feels like they do know a lot, but you want to validate whether their answers are accurate or not, just ask them how many returns they've filed in the last 24 months where somebody actually executed on the short-term rental loophole. Meaning, how many clients do you have who bought an Airbnb in the last 1 to 2 years and you actually supported filing their returns with them? So what this will quickly do is it will just weed out the CPAs who literally don't know anything about the short-term rental loophole. And the reality is, like I mentioned, there are over 160 million tax returns that are filed every single year. There are maybe anywhere from 100 to 300,000 returns that have anything to do with short-term rentals in the short-term rental loophole. That's not 1%, that is literally 0.1% of all returns. So accordingly, you kind of need one CPA who's in the 99th or 99.9th percentile to actually be giving you insight and advising on buying short-term rentals and then doing it to max out the tax benefits. So what I would encourage you is this. The reality is you probably will need to explore working with a different CPA because again, the reality is there are maybe a few 100,000 or a few million plus CPAs in the US who do tax returns. The challenge is you're only going to find a very specific few who actually specialize in the short-term rental game. So you can reach out to us, ask for intros. We're more than happy to introduce people. We don't get monetary kickbacks. There are no back and forth exchanges happening where we get paid for making intros. I've had to personally go through 6 or 7 different CPAs until I found CPAs number 6 and 7 who both do specialize in short-term rentals. They do amazing work for me. And then I've also introduced those guys to clients, and I have a Rolodex of 5 to 10 other CPAs who clearly after a quick 30, 60-minute call with them, they also specialize in doing short-term rentals. So just keep in mind, your CPA probably does not want to admit to you that they don't know much about the specific and nuanced approach for short-term rentals and short-term rental strategy. So always make sure you're just working with somebody who actually can validate, hey, yeah, I've filed over 100 returns for clients who have short-term rental properties in the last 12 months. If they don't even pass that litmus test, literally move on. Like the reality is I had to move on from CPA number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 until I found guys number 6 and 7. It took me a few years, but the reality is every time I made that upgrade, everything got much, much better. And also don't be afraid to pay CPAs a little bit more than what you're used to. There's a complete difference from somebody who's a tax strategist or a tax advisor and somebody who literally just files 1040 or is a return preparer who just plugs numbers into boxes. All they're trying to do is just plug the right number into the right box and charge you a few $100. A strategist or an advisor is going to do a much more nuanced approach to what are you making? What are your other financial situations? What else can we write off? If you're doing short-term rentals, what does that look like? They can help model and approach the whole strategy for you much better. So not telling you to ditch your current CPA, but the reality is they probably don't specialize in this. So do be prepared to upgrade to a new CPA who actually specializes in working with clients who do short-term rentals. Hey, if you made it this far in this video, congratulations. You are probably in the top 1% of people who actually will do short-term rentals this year, because again, every year there are maybe 100,000 to 300,000 short-term rentals that are purchased. Half of them are probably in markets and sub-property types that just won't cash flow. So I want you to make sure that you're doing this the right way. And I want you to continue consuming and checking out more content on our channel. We absolutely love putting this education out here for free. My promise was that by the end of this video, you'd be clear on how to get a cash flowing, tax saving Airbnb. You'd know the landmines to avoid, and then also making sure that we put you in touch with the right people and the right areas to do deals in. So here, as I promised, is a quick list once again of all the top markets that we like to do deals in. Pause the screen right here and just take a look at some of these if you aren't already looking in them. And what I'll also invite you to do is, the reality is, I've surveyed clients, and on average, the best ones take 30 to 60 hours to do all this process on their own end to end, which is looking at deals, finding deals, underwriting markets, going back and forth with sellers, negotiating. And most of my clients who have done this on their own, but they're not exceptionally professional, they take anywhere from 60 to 120 plus hours to do this all on their own. If you want to work with a team who will help you take out the guesswork and the legwork for this whole process, click the link somewhere around this video. Check out more of our case studies and how we've helped other clients. It'll take 30 to 45 minutes on a call. You'll probably be speaking with me to review what's your income, what's your cash on hand, why short-term rentals and why now, what's the transformation you're looking for, and let's come up with a custom game plan to do all this for you. So thank you for checking this video out. Keep looking for more of our stuff. And if you're interested in working together, click the link somewhere around this video, and we look forward to speaking with you soon.